Now that we have the blockchain class within our blockchain project, let's create the actual blockchain class. At a basic level, the blockchain is based off of a few concepts. First, its chain is an array of blocks. The first block in this array is the default Genesis block. It should then support the ability to add a block to the chain. Based on some input, it will create a new block and add it to the end of its own array. Finally, the new block that is created will be based on the last block. And by doing this, it creates links across the chain. So with that in mind, let's create this new blockchain class. Go ahead and open up the SFChain project in your code editor. To start, let's add a new file at the root of the project called blockchain.js. So we have a new file called blockchain.js. Now this will hold the blockchain class. So first up, since this will be a class based off of using a chain of blocks, we'll need access to the block class. So let's set up a block constant that is the result of requiring the block module that is local to this file. Local meaning /. And now let's create our blockchain class. So we're going to have a class called blockchain, the body of the function with a pair of curly braces. And then we're going to have this special constructor function. And in this constructor, we actually won't have any parameters, but we will give this blockchain object a chain that is for now set to an empty array. So for the very first element in this array of blocks called our chain, we're going to give it the Genesis block. So that way this chain can get started with some values, or rather with the one Genesis value. Now directly call block.genesis within the array that is set to the chain. Great. We now have the chain for the blockchain class. Now let's give it the ability to add a block with a function called addBlock. So we're going to have a function for this called addBlock, and it actually has one parameter, the data we want to store within that block. To add a block, we need a last block as input, along with our data. So let's make a last block constant within here. And then to use a last block, what we can do is grab the one that is currently at the end of this chain. So we'll find that by going into this .chain, and then we're using brackets to access something at a specific index, and then we'll access the element at the last index, which is this .chain.length minus 1. So what this is doing is getting the length of this chain, subtracting 1 from that value, and that should be the last element within this chain array. So that represents the last block that is within that chain. Okay, great. Now we can generate a new block using the mindBlock function we defined previously within the block class based off of this last block and the given data. So let's create a local block constant. We'll set it equal to calling block.mindBlock. We'll input the last block as well as the given data for the addBlock function. And now with our new block, let's add it to the end of the chain array using the push function off of arrays in JavaScript. So we'll call this .chain and call push, inputting the block that we just created. And finally, let's return the block as a result of this function after a couple new lines with return block. Okay, great. We now have this addBlock function. However, notice that we're only using the last block constant once. So we can make this function more condensed by inlining the last block into our mindBlock function. So let's take this out and then cut it and put it within the mindBlock function. So now it's block.mindBlock, and then the first input is this .chain, and then accessing this .chain.length minus 1, and then we can go ahead and delete this superfluous line that we don't need anymore. So this completes the first bit of functionality for our block class. To complete this file, we're going to make sure that we're sharing this as the default module export. So call module.exports equals blockchain, so that way other files can access this class that we just created. Excellent. Let's move on and make sure this blockchain class actually works in the way we intended to by testing this blockchain class next.